Hey everyone, and welcome back to this Python series. And in this lesson we are going to be covering the topic of while loops. So simply, a while loop in Python is something that is used to repeatedly execute a block of code while that condition remains true. And the loop will continue iterating as that remains true, and it will stop when the condition becomes false. Now there can be some cases where the while loop will end despite the condition not becoming explicitly false, and I'll get into those examples later in the video. So let's go ahead and jump right into the first example where we'll be doing a countdown for this while loop. So we can assign our variable numbers equals 5, and we can do while numbers is greater than 0, colon, and this numbers is greater than 0 is our condition. And is the condition already true? Well, numbers is set to 5, and 5 is definitely greater than 0, so therefore this condition is true. So it will run the block of code that is inside it. And that'll be, we're going to first print the numbers into the interactive shell, and then we're going to do subtraction. So numbers is minus equals 1, which will take away 1 with each loop iteration. And then once that is done, I'm going to simply head back to the original indentation and print you win. It'll print that string onto the interactive shell once the while loop ends. Let me go ahead and run this program and demonstrate. And it is functioning exactly as we want. It will start at 5, and then it will head down all the way to 1, and then once it is 0, that condition becomes false, because what we wanted to do is make sure that it will run only when it's greater than 0. So therefore, when it hits 0, it exits the while loop, and then it prints you win. And to make it less confusing, I'm going to show you a flowchart of this program. So it's the same program, really. It's just broken down into a flowchart. So over here, when we start the program, numbers is set to 5, and it goes down to check if numbers is greater than 0. And over here, this condition, when it's true, it will go ahead and head right over here to this arrow, true, and then it will go ahead and print that number onto the interactive shell, and then it'll go down over here and subtract 1, which is this numbers minus equals 1. It will go back over here and check the condition again if it is still true, and if it's still true, we will go back and repeat that. So if this will keep looping, this section of the flowchart over here will keep looping and checking the condition, and when the condition is finally false, it will go down to this arrow over here that says false, and then it will print out you win, and then it will end the program. So it will not go down to this false arrow until this one here is no longer true. So you'll first check true or false, and if the condition is true, go down to this portion of the flowchart and keep looping endlessly until it becomes false, and then that's the time that the program will finally end. So that's just this program broken down. Let's head over to our second example now, which this while loop will take in user input. Get rid of that, and we're gonna go ahead and take in user input as I mentioned earlier. So it's gonna do a variable called user underscore input. We can simply do an input function over here, and it will say enter yes to continue. And yes, you're gonna do the double quotation marks outside because we don't want that to end the string if we do an apostrophe inside with a single quotation mark inside that. So then let's do while user underscore input dot lower is not equal to yes, and this dot lower over here simply it will make sure that anything we type in the user input, whether it's capitalized or not, the lower method in Python is a string method that will convert all the characters in a string to lowercase. So that is particularly useful if you want to perform tasks without worrying about it being case sensitive. So you can experiment if you want to, but if you get rid of this and you type in yes with a capital letter anywhere, it will not work. So just to take care of that, we put in this dot lower method in Python. Alright, so let's go ahead and continue the rest of this while loop. So it will say print it'll say you didn't say yes. Try again. That is if you did not type yes in that user input. And then we can loop this again. User input equals input, enter yes to continue. Now the reason why we didn't just copy and paste this, because even though it's the same line, I would suggest you to type out the code as much as you can rather than just copying and pasting it, because it will help you build your muscle memory and it forces you to see if you can get the code working. So that's it for the while loop. We can go back to the original indentation and we can print access granted. And don't worry, I have another flow chart for this as well, but let's go ahead and demonstrate what the program will be like. So enter yes to continue, and then when that happens, the this becomes false, because right now we're checking to see if it doesn't equal yes, then repeat that block of code inside the while loop. So let me demonstrate what happens if we don't type in yes. It'll say you didn't say yes, try again. You can type in anything else, and it doesn't really matter what you type. We can type in my name, for example. It doesn't really matter what you type. It will continue looping until you type yes. So that is an example of a while loop that will loop over and over until the condition is met. So let's break down this program onto our other flowchart. This over here is much bigger flowchart, so let me go ahead and break this down. When we start the program, it will first take in user input, and then when that user input is taken, it will go ahead and go down into the next one where it will finally check if the condition is true or false. Now over here it has a exclamation mark equals, and that is simply the not equal to operator. So it's saying that the user input is not equal to yes, then that means it is true. Example, if we type in anything else that is not yes, it will say true, and then it will go ahead and say you didn't say yes, try again, and then it will run this block of code over here. Well, it's not this block, rather it will run this line of code over here, and then it will make you type in something else, and then that is the time it will go back to this arrow, back to the condition. So it won't automatically go back to the condition. It will first make you have another user input, and then it will go back to that condition to check if you've finally typed in yes. And that will continue repeating over and over, like I did over here when I didn't type in yes at first. And then when it is finally yes, therefore this condition becomes false, it will go down to this arrow and it will say access granted, and that will end the program as shown over here, which is what exactly happened when we typed in yes. It finally went down to that arrow where it said false. Okay, so I'm gonna show one other example where a while loop can end without the condition explicitly becoming false, and that will be back to our first example, which is this over here. I will experiment with this example, and it was numbers equals, I believe it was 5. Let me go ahead and double check. So yes, while numbers is greater than 0. So while numbers is greater than 0, colon, and that was print numbers minus equals 1, print you win. Okay, over here what we can do is we can do an if statement. If numbers equals 3, colon, we can do a break statement over here. And let's run this program. See how this is an example of when the condition the condition was not met, but the loop still ended and it went straight to you win. The reason for that is because if we are subtracting 1 from the original value, it will go ahead and repeat that over and over, but as long as it equals 3, it will go ahead and break. It will exit the while loop. So technically this, obviously 3 is not equal to 0, but we had this if statement to cover that. So even if the original condition was not met, therefore it's still greater than 0, so it would continue looping under normal circumstances, but since we have this if statement now, it will break at the certain point where numbers equals 3. And that's the reason why it went straight to you win right after number 4. We can go ahead and mess with this a little bit. So we do 2, and it should do 3 inclusive. There we go, 3 was included, and then it went straight to you win. So that's one example of where you can break out of the while loop early before the condition becomes false. Alright, and another one I wanted to show you is one where the while loop becomes infinite. So it's like the condition will never become false, and it will loop endlessly in your program. I'm going to demonstrate right now. Let's get rid of if statement right here. So it's back to this regular program like before. So I'm going to go ahead and run this program, which I did right now, and we'll make this an endless loop. To do that, we can either get rid of the line altogether, or you can just simply comment it out. Remember, like I mentioned before, Python ignores comments. So if we run that, and whoa, this program will continue running, and then you can end the program by doing Control-C on your keyboard for the keyboard interrupt. Right? And the reason for that is because we got rid of the line that will make this condition eventually false. Therefore, numbers will always remain as 5. Therefore, it will always be greater than 0, and there is nothing in this line of code that will end this while loop. So that's another way you can break out of the while loop without the condition explicitly becoming false. You can just interrupt it with Control-C, or it will just continue looping over and over until the program crashes. Alright, another example I wanted to show you is a continue statement. So don't worry, we'll use the same while loop for this, and I've also cleaned up the interactive shell before we get to this example. So over here, we're going to have to change up a few things, where we'll first uncomment that, and then next thing we're going to do is we're going to put this print function also on top of that before the while loop. And then the reason we want to do that is because we want to start at 5, but if you run this while loop without putting this print function here, it will start at 4. So in that case, we can now do our if statement, and we can just do if numbers equals 3, and we can do a continue statement here, and then we can print out the numbers. Alright, so I'm going to run and demonstrate the program. So as you can see over here, it starts at 5, which will call this line first, and then it goes to the while loop, and then it subtracts. But if it hits the number 3, as you can see, it continues past that. It skips the number 3, and we can do the same thing if we do, let's do 4, and run the program again. It skips number 4 because it just says continue over that one, and then keep looping until the condition again becomes false. You can even do that for number 2 as well. And as you can see, it skips over number 2. So that's one other statement aside from break that I wanted to show you in this video. Okay, so those are some examples of while loops, and for the next lesson we are going to be covering for loops, so stay tuned for that, and I will see you soon.